The story of Earl Magnus. 39. Now the sons of Earl Thorfinn took the realm after him. Paul was the elder of them, and he took the lead over them. They did not share the lands between them, and yet were a very long time well agreed in their dealings. Ingiborg Earl's mother gave herself away, after the death of Earl Thorfinn, to Malcolm the Scot King, who was called Longneck. Their son was Duncan the Scot King, father of William the nobleman. His son's name again was William the Prince, whom all the Scots wished to take for the king. Earl Paul, Thorfinn's son, got to wife the daughter of Earl Håkon Ivar's son, and they had many children. Their son's name was Håkon. They had a daughter whose name was Thora. She was given away in Norway to Halder, the son of Brynjulf Camel. Their son's name was Brynjulf. His son's name was Halder, who had to wife Geirrid Dag's daughter. Another daughter of Paul's was named Ingirid, whom Minervor Sacro had to wife. Herbjorg was the name of Paul's third daughter. She was the mother of Ingiborg the Honorable, whom Sigurd of Westness had to wife, and their sons were Hakon Pick and Brynjulf. Sigrid was another daughter of Herbjorg, the mother of Hakon Bern and Herborg, whom Kolbein the Burly had to wife. Ragnhilda was the name of a fourth daughter of Earl Paul. She was the mother of Benedict, the father of Ingiborg, the mother of Erling the Archdeacon. Bergliot was the name of another daughter of Ragnhilda, whom Havergunni's son had to wife. Their sons were Magnus and Hakon Claw, and Dufnjall and Thorstein. These are all Earl's kin, and noblemen in the Orkneys, and all these men come into the story afterwards. Earl Erlend Thorfinn's son had to wife that woman whose name was Thor and was the daughter of Summerl the son of Ospak. The mother of Ospak was Thordis, daughter of Hollow the Side. Erling and Magnus were their Erlend's and Thor's sons, but their daughters were Gunilda and Cecilia, whom Isaac had to wife, and their sons Cecilius and Isaacs were Andrade and Cole. Jetver was the name of a base-born daughter of Erlend. Her son's name was Borgar. 40. When those brothers Paul and Erlend had taken the rule in the Orkneys, Harold Sigurd's son came from the east out of Norway with a great host. He came first to Shetland. Thence he fared to the Orkneys. There he left behind him Elspeth his queen and their daughters Maria and Ingigerd. Out of the Orkneys he had much force. Both the earls made ready to go with the king. The king fared thence south to England, and landed in the place called Cleveland, and won Scarborough. After that he ran in at Alornus, and had there a battle and won the victory. On the midweek day Wednesday next before Matfes Mass he had a battle in York against Earls Waltoff and Morcar. There Morcar fell. The Sunday after that Burg was given into the power of King Harold, which stood by Stamford Bridge. The Monday after he went on land to settle things in the town. At the ships he left behind him his son Olaf, and Earls Paul and Erlend, and Eystein Gorkok his brother-in-law, and Thorberg Arni's son. In that land journey came Harold, Godwin's son, against King Harold with an overwhelming host. A great battle arose at once, and in that battle fell Harold Sigurd's son. After the king's fall came Eystein Gorkok from the ships, and the earls, and made a very hard onslaught. That battle was called the Gorkok Storm or the Gorkok's Bout. There fell Eystein Gorkok, and well-nigh the whole host of the Northmen. After those fights King Harold gave Olaf Harold's son, and the earls leave to go away out of England, and also to all that host that had not already fled. Olaf sailed out about autumn from Ravensur, and so to the Orkneys. And there they heard these tidings, that on that day and at that hour when Harold fell, his daughter Maria died a sudden death. And it is the talk of men that they have had but one man's life between them. Olaf was that winter in the Orkneys, and he was the greatest friend of the earls his kinsmen. They were brothers' daughters, Thora King Olaf's mother and Ingiborg the earl's mother. Olaf fared when the spring came east to Norway, and was there taken to be king with Magnus his brother. But when those brothers ruled the Orkneys, Then was their agreement great and good a long while. But when their sons began to grow up, then they became very overbearing men, Hakon and Erling. Magnus was the quietest tempered of them. They were all of them tall and strong, and proper men in all things. Hakon, Paul's son, would be the leader over those brothers, his cousins. He thought he was more by birth than the sons of Erland, because he was the daughter's son of Earl Hakon Ivar's son, and Ragnhild a daughter of King Magnus the Good. Hakon would have it that his friends should have a larger lot when there was anything to share than they allowed to the sons of Erland. But Erland would not that his sons should have the worst of it there in the Isles. Then it so came about that those kinsmen could not be together in peace, and there was danger with them. Then their fathers took a share in the matter. They were to try and make matters up. Then a meeting was fixed, and it was soon found out that each of them leant towards his own sons, and they could make no settlement. Now disagreement arose between those brothers, and they parted bad friends, and that many thought great scathe. 1. Come into his hand, become his leagueman. 2. Floor lads, and got a fair wind. 3. Floor lads, Thorkel made him captive, and bade men put an end to the Earl, and offered them money to do it. But no one would do it any more for money. Then Thorkel did the deed himself, for that he knew that one or other of them must bow before the other. Then Earl Thorfinn came up, and did not blame the deed. 4. The Florida has here left out a long passage which runs thus in the Danish translation, but to King Sweyn he gave Denmark. He also sent his brother Thorir and many other of his friends whom he wished to be well treated to King Sweyn. But after King Magnus was dead, King Harald gave out that he would make for Borgthing, and let himself be chosen their king over all Denmark, and said that then the Norwegians would be forever over the Danes, and made a long speech about it. But Einar Pondshaker answered him, and said, It is more to my mind, and I am more bound, to bear the body of King Magnus north to Norway to the same King Olaf, his father, than to fight along with King Harald for other kings' realms. And at the same time he ended his speech by saying he thought it better to follow King Magnus dead than any other king alive. And there and then Einar went to his ship, and as he went all the chiefs, whose homes lay north of Stad in Norway, went with him. Then King Harald saw no other way than to sail first to Norway, and first take the kingdom under him. King Sweyn was in Skåne at the time that he heard that King Magnus was dead. He had it then in his mind to ride east into Sweden, and to give up the name of king which he had taken. And just as he was ready to start there came a man to him who told him that King Magnus was dead, and all the Norwegian host had gone out of Denmark. Then King Sweyn swore by God that he would never give up Denmark for any man so long as he was alive. Then he crossed over to Zealand, and laid the realm under him wherever he came. There he met Thorir and many other of King Magnus' men whom he had sent together. He took very kindly to them, and Thorir was with him a long time afterwards. 5. 50 would seem to be the true reading, for Thorfinn seems to have reigned from AD 1014 till 1064, in which latter year the Earl appears to have died. 6. Burden. Heaven, the burden of Austria, one of the 4 dwarves who bore up the heavens. 7. Here begins the second part of the Orkneyingers saga, containing an abridgment of the life of Saint Magnus. 41. After that kindly men came between them, and seek to settle things. So there was a peace meeting fixed for them in Rossi. At that meeting a settlement was made in this way, that then the isles were shared into halves as they had been between Thorfinn and Brussi. So things stood a while. Hakon was then almost always away war-roving since he had grown up. He became then a very overbearing man, and they were hard on those men who served under those kingmen, Erland and his sons. So it came about again that the settlement was broken, and they fared against each other a great force. Havergunni's son and all the other noblemen of the earls came one day between them, and again brought them together and tried to bring about a settlement. Then Erlend and his sons would not make matters up, so that Hakon was to be there in the Isles. But because it seemed to their friends that there was great risk in their quarrels, then they prayed Hakon not to let this stand in the way of peace, but that he would rather fare away out of the Isles. They said it would be good counsel if he fared east across the sea to visit his kinsmen, both in Norway and Sweden, and at the beseeching of his men, and also that Hakon was envious of his kinsmen there in the Isles, and thought it good to learn the ways of other chiefs. Then he granted them their prayer that he would fare away at once out of the Isles. Then the settlement was again made by the council of good men. After that Hakon fared away out of the Isles, first east to Norway, and he found there King Olaf the Quiet. This was about the end of his days. There Hakon stayed some time. After that he fared east to Sweden to see King Ingi, Steinkel's son, and he made him welcome. He found there his friends and kinsmen. He reaped there the greatest honor from the friendships of Hakon, his mother's father. He had held rule there from Steinkel, the Swede king, after he had to fly the land before King Harald Sigurd's son. He had grown there to be the greatest friend, both of the king and the men of the land. Another daughter's son of Earl Hakon Ivar's son, was Hakon, who called the Northmen. He was father of Eric the Wise, who was king in Denmark after King Eric the Ever-Memorable. Hakon stayed in Sweden a while, and King Ingi was good to him. But when things had gone on so a while, then homesickness came over him to seek west to the Isles. Christianity was then young in Sweden. There were then many men who went about with witchcraft, and thought by that to become wise and knowing of many things which had not yet come to pass. King Ingi was a thorough Christian man, and all wizards were loathsome to him. He took great pains to root out those evil ways which had long gone hand in hand with heathendom. But the rulers of the land and the great freeholders took it ill that their bad customs were found fault with. So it came about that the freemen chose them another king, Sweyn, the queen's brother, who still held to his sacrifices to idols, and was called Sacrifice Sweyn. Before him King Ingi was forced to fly the land into West Gothland. But the end of their dealings was that King Ingi took the house over Sweyn's head and burnt him inside it. After that he took all the land under him. Then he still went on rooting out many bad ways. 42. When Hakon Paul's son was in Sweden, he had heard say that there in the land was a man who went about with wisdom and sped him, whether he got it by witchcraft or other things. He had a great longing to find out this man, and to know whether he could be made wise as to his future fate. And after that he fared to that man, and found him at last dwelling in the woods. There he used to go about to feasts, and told the freemen about their crops and other things. But when he found that man, then he asked him he might come to power or other good luck. The wizard asked him what manner of man he was. He told him his name and kin, that he was the daughter's son of Hakon Ivar's son. Then said the wizard, "Why wilt thou take of me wisdom or sayings? Thou knowest that those kinsmen of thine of old have had little mind for such like men as I am, and it may serve thy need that thou shouldest seek to know thy fate from Olaf the Stout. Thy kinsman, the king of Norway, whom ye set all faith in. But I rather doubt that he would not have humble-mindedness enough to tell thee what thou art eager to know, or perhaps be not so mighty either as ye say he is." Then Hakon answers, "I will not speak ill of him. I think it more likely that I may not have worthiness enough to take wisdom from him, than that he may not be so powerful, that for that reason I should not take wisdom from him. But this is why I have come to see thee, because it hath come into my mind that here neither of us will need to envy the other for the sake of matters of virtue or belief." That man answers, "It likes me well that I find that thou thinkest that thou hast all trust where I am, and before that faith which ye have followed, you and your other kinsmen. So it is, too, that with you those who lay themselves out for such things go wondrously to work. They go about with fasts and wakes, and deem that therefore those things must be granted to them which they are eager to know. But though they take such pains, yet are they all the less wise of what they desire to know, the more they mix themselves up with them. But we lay ourselves under no penance, and yet we are always wise as to those things of which our friends think it worthwhile that they should not go on in ignorance. Now things will so go with us too that thou shalt get this gain from me, as I see clearly that thou thinkest thyself better able to get the truth from me than from King Inge's priestly teachers, whom he thinks he may put all trust in. Thou shalt come in 3 nights' space, and then we too will try if I can tell thee anything which thou art eager to know. After that they part, and Hakon stays there in those parts, and when 3 nights were gone by he fared to meet the wizard. He was then in a certain house all alone, and drew his breath heavily when the Hakon went in, stroked his brow with his hand, and said it cost him much or he became wise of those things which he was to know beforehand. Hakon says he was willing to hear his future fate. The spearman began to say, If thou wilt know thy fate, then is it long to tell about, for that it is great and, because from thy life and labor very great tidings will come to pass. And it is my belief that thou wilt come to be sole chief over the Orkneys at last, but it may be that thou wilt think it long to wait. I trow, also, that thy offspring will rule there. But from thy western voyage, which thou farest next of all to the Orkneys, very great tidings will come about when those things are fulfilled which will spring from it. Thou wilt also in thy days let that wickedness be done which thou must either make atonement for or not to that God in whom thou believest. But thy footsteps lie further out into the world than I can get to see, but still I think that thou wilt bring back thy bones here to the northern half of the world. Now have I told thee those things that I can at this time, and now say how thou wilt like thy day's work. Hakon answers, A great story is this thou tellest, if it be sooth, but I think it will go better with my lot than thou sayest. Maybe, too, that thou hast not seen all this of a truth. The spearman bade him believe it or not as he chose, but said that it would come to pass. 43. After that Hakon went away to see King Inge, and stayed with him a short time ere he set his heart on faring to the western lands. Then he took leave of the king to go away. Hakon fared first to Norway to see his kinsman King Magnus, and he made him welcome. Then he learned those tidings from the Orkneys, that Earl Erlend and his sons had it almost all their own way there, and had won very many friends. But Paul his father had little or nothing to do with ruling the land. He thought, too, he made out from those men who came from the west, and in whose words he could put most faith, that the Orkneyingers would long very little for his coming thither west. For they had already good peace and quietness, but feared if Hakon came west that strife and uproar would arise from him. But when Hakon thought of this to himself, then he thought it not unlikely that those kinsmen would hold the realm from him. But let it not be without risk to him if he came thither west without a great force. So he took that counsel to seek to King Magnus that he would bring him to power in the Orkneys. This was after that King Magnus had made them put to death Styger Thorir and Egil, and freed the land from all strife. Hakon was a wise man, and he thought he could see by King Magnus' talk when they spoke together, that the king would be high-minded and eager to attack the realms of other chiefs. Hakon fell to saying this before the king, that it would be a brave deed for a prince to have out the levy and harry west across the sea, and lay the isles under him, as Harold Fairhair did. Says, too, if he could get rule in the southern isles, it would be handy to harry thence in Ireland and Scotland. And if he put the western lands under him, that thence it would be good to strive with the strength of the Northmen against the Englishmen, and so avenge Harold Sigurd's son, thy father's father. But when they spoke of this, it was found that this jumped well with the king's temper. He said it was well and bravely spoken, and near his mind. But that thou shalt keep in mind, Hakon, says the king, if I were to do this after thy words and egging on, to fare with a host west over the sea, that it must not come on thee unawares. though I bore on with a bold claim to those realms which lie away their west, and making that no distinction of men. But when Hakon heard this utterance, he grew cold and said very little more about it, and doubted for what these words could be spoken. He left off after that egging on the king to any voyage. But then little was needed, for after this speech the king sent messengers over all his realm that the levy should be out. He laid it bare before all the people that he meant to hold on with that host west over the sea, whatever tidings might happen afterwards in his voyages. So men made ready for this voyage all over the land. King Magnus had with him his son on this voyage, 8 winters old, whose name was Sigurd. He was much of a man for his years. 44. When those brothers Paul and Erland ruled over the Orkneys, King Magnus, the son of Olaf the Quiet, came from the east out of Norway. He had a mighty host, and many liegemen followed him. Vidkun Jonsson, Sigurd Hranna's son, Sark out of Son, Dag Eilif's son, Skopdai of Giski, Ogmund, Finn, and Thord, even Delbo the king's marshal. There was also Kalai of Ager Saber's son, the son of Thorleif the Wise, whom Halford maimed, and Kol his son. Kalai was a very wise man, and dear to the king, and a good rhymer. Now when King Magnus came to the Orkneys, then he seized the Earls Paul and Erland, and sent them east to Norway, but set up his son Sigurd over the isles, and gave him counselors. King Magnus fared to the southern isles, and the Earl's sons, Magnus and Erling, sons of Earl Erland, and Hakon, Paul's son, went along with him. But when King Magnus came into the isles, he fell to harrying first in the Lewes, and won them. And in that voyage he won all the southern isles, and took captive Logman, the son of Gudrid, the king of the southern isles. Thence he fared south under Bretland Wales, and had a great battle in Anglesey Sound with 2 British earls, Hugh the Stout and Hugh the Proud. They were brothers of Costnomi, who was then king in Ireland in Ulster. And when men were getting out their weapons and busking themselves for the fight, Magnus, Erland's son, sate him down aft in the forecastle, and did not arm himself. The king asked why he sate. He said he had no quarrel with any man there. "That's why I will not fight," the king said. "Get thee away down under the thwarts, and don't lie here before men's feet, if thou darest not to fight, for I do not think that faith drives thee to this." Magnus took a psalter,